Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us for this very special event, which is a meeting of the university community with our distinguished guest, Professor Brianem Kobilka, and his wife, Tong Sun. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much, Tong Sun, for coming to our university. We had amazing days, and today we had a very special ceremony, which was awarding the Honorary Doctorate. So we could experience your participation, and I'm sure that all the participants of that ceremony appreciated also that very much. I discussed with many of them, and they were very, very much impressed. Before we start asking questions and discussion with our university community, I would like to run a short video. Can we run it?
Stanford University.
At 2:20 this morning, I was phoned and told I was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry.
He was stunned. You didn't say anything for a long time.
It's believable when you have that many people with credible Swedish accents congratulating you that it's probably real.
How is it?
Hello? The phone's been ringing nonstop from Europe, from Brazil, yes. Colombia, Spain. I was probably a nerd, yes.
This is Kenneth Chang from the New York Times. Then we have 2 television crews downstairs.
I had no idea it was going to be this much attention. I didn't realize it was such a big deal that, yeah. I mean, I knew it's a big deal, but I didn't.
No, it's this big.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
Everybody asks what I'm going to do with the money.
You did win a substantial money prize here. Any thoughts as to what that could go to?
Scientists don't make that much money, and don't know what's going to happen in the future. You want to be able to have something to leave to your children.
Your kids must be so thrilled. Are they jumping up and down?
Yeah, my daughter couldn't get back to sleep. She happened to be up to go to the bathroom, and I texted.
My wife has been a colleague and collaborator in this ever since I was in the Lefkowitz lab, and I attribute much of my success to both her support and also her scientific input.
Very proud. Well deserved.
This is the cover of our recent paper, and I think it's the work that probably earned me the prize. I work on a family of proteins called G-protein coupled receptors, and these are receptors that are important in the body sensing hormones and neurotransmitters. They're involved in almost every aspect of physiology, so from neuropsychiatric disorders to metabolic disorders like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, almost every disease you can think of, even cancer. We hope these structures and this approach to studying receptors will lead to the development of safer, more effective drugs. I think being at Stanford was really important. The colleagues at Stanford, the support of the university, it's been amazing, and also the students that Stanford attracts are absolutely brilliant.
What's next for you?
I hope I can continue doing what I'm doing, and actually I hope maybe the recognition might help me continue to get funding to do my research.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.
I heard to a number of your talks, Brian, and all the time you appreciate Tong Sun's support during all your career. It's not always happens that the couples can work together. Is it easy in your case? Is it very helpful?
Yeah, I would say we have gotten along quite well, given that we work together so much. And maybe an occasional disagreement about some things, but rarely.
But I'm always right.
Of course.
And I know that your career went you through very many institutions. You started University of Minnesota. In the meantime, you were to Yale. You were to Duke University when you met Professor Robert Lefkowitz. And you also were working for a hospital. And finally, you established your career at Stanford University. And so it looks like a puzzle. It's, if any of the element is missing, would your career went so well?
Well, probably not. I think, although I didn't, what can I say? I didn't plan very carefully. Opportunities opened up, and I took advantage of them. But I can't say that I intentionally decided to go to Yale, for example. I applied to 10 universities. I got in only 2, and one was Yale. And then my residency in the United States, when you pick, after you're done with medical school, you enter what's called a match, and you put in preference where you'd like to do your internal medicine training. I visited 10 places. I got my 5th choice. So obviously I didn't get accepted where I really wanted to go.
Mm-hmm.
Nevertheless.
What was that?
It was probably the Mass General.
Uh-huh.
And I would have to say it was a great experience
Mm-hmm.
at Washington University and at Barnes Hospital. And I was probably directed towards Duke by a fellow resident who had actually done some research on adrenergic receptors and suggested that I try to get into the Lefkowitz lab.
Mm-hmm.
So, it wasn't very proactive on my part. Opportunities opened up and I took advantage of them.
And finally, you are at Stanford, and you mentioned that at Stanford you have brilliant students, you have brilliant co-workers, and they provided you very special conditions. What is crucial to have such conditions in Stanford? How do they approach people like you who come with the ideas? They are not well known yet, although in your case you came from Duke when you worked with Robert Lefkowitz, yes? So it is a different case. But you can observe how the others come to Stanford. Yes, they are chosen in a very specific way because Stanford looks for diversity. Yes, also because they think, as far as I know, that in diversity they can have better generation of new concepts and ideas. That people can be more creative.
That's correct. So one wouldn't expect to find, after hiring me, they wouldn't necessarily hire someone else who's also involved in G protein coupled receptors. They would want to hire someone who's doing some other kind of research. So they want to build diversity in their science. I think another advantage of Stanford is the promotion system. So every person who gets offered a junior faculty position as an assistant professor will not have to compete with his fellows for tenure. So I had a tenure track slot available to me, and I just had to earn it, as opposed to, other universities of similar caliber, where it's a pyramid system. Young investigators have to compete with their fellow assistant professors for tenure track slots, and as a result, those places there's often competition between young faculty. Whereas at Stanford, there's a lot of collaboration. It really fosters collaboration amongst all young people to do the best science. Everybody wins, as opposed to competing with your colleagues. So I think, and then finally, the size of Stanford. So the medical school at Stanford is right across, the basic sciences in the medical school are right across the street from the basic sciences in the undergraduate campus. Everything is really within walking distance, and that also fosters collaborations.
And thank you very much for this information. It's very precious to us because we are also trying to elaborate our system to work better. And you mentioned also that at Stanford, when you have some questions, you can go to other professors to meet them, to work together, and you even don't bother to go to hear their lectures, even being a professor. Yes, is this common? Yes,
it's very common for people to collaborate closely with colleagues from different departments. The departmental structures are pretty porous in that it's very easy for people to communicate across departments.
Tong Sun, you said today when we exchanged our ideas about the universities in different countries, you said that our university has a very unique opportunity to collaborate with industry. And what surprised me, you said that at Stanford there is not such a case, in fact, yes? There is the Silicon Valley, and obviously there are many companies, but related to mostly one fields or something which is, let's say, similar, perhaps also something related to economics, but to the others, how does it work?
Now that's going to be tough for me to explain. Stanford takes pride in being an independent academic institution. Mm-hmm. The sole idea is to teach, to nurture, to mentor. They don't want to be seen as, oh, you're preparing your engineers for a company, commercial. No. So they have to keep a strict border between extracurricular activities of the professor and the university. So for example, when he started the company, he can't be executive. That's why I'm the CEO. Mm-hmm. He is the brain of the outfit, but he can advise. But he cannot be making executive decisions. Even though informally he can be. He can't sit on the board, he can be a consultant. So that's the difference. Maybe there's an arrogant stance of Stanford saying, well, I'm not. The companies grew because of Stanford, I think.
Yes, and you said about the company where you are trying to encourage the industry to implement the ideas of your development, yes? This one you mentioned, yes? Conformats. Yes.
Conformatrix.
Yes.
Yeah, so he had ideas that has commercial our end product, not like papers. How can you do that? He can't do that at Stanford. So that's why we had to set up a separate entity. While the technology may be similar, the goals are different. So he can't put a graduate student or a postdoc to work at Conformatrix. No, we're separate. So that's the distinction, I guess.
And I know that you have a number of friends who are Nobel laureates working at Stanford. So do they create a kind of club? Do you meet frequently? How does it work?
No, they're all over the campus.
Well, we do meet frequently with
on a social
on a social level with the economics Nobel laureate from the same year, 2012, Al Roth and his wife. But I mean, I encounter colleagues in my department. There are 2 other Nobel laureates in our department, so during faculty meetings we may meet, but no, there's no club.
In your career, you needed to approach the different kind of infrastructure and test and try several times to develop what finally happened. And so what does the science mean to you? Is this the continuous research, even if you fail a lot of times? And you mentioned that even if you fail, you need to learn from the failures, yes? So is this science in your understanding?
Yes, I believe part of science is trying and failing. And of course, I failed many times over the years, both as a fellow in the Lefkowitz lab and as a professor at Stanford. But I think it's important when designing an experiment to learn from the experiment. So if an experiment's failed and you can't understand why it failed, then it's a complete waste of time and money. So I tried to be very careful when I designed particularly expensive or very time-consuming experiments to be able to what we would call do a post-mortem, which is a term used to describe how you might try to understand why someone died, but try to figure out what the cause of failure, and then that often can give you ideas on what to do next time. I think also being in a place like Stanford, you are exposed to scientists with a broad range of disciplines. And often in attending a seminar on a completely different topic, I'd learn something that would help me in my research.
And how do you found the trials and errors? Because, you know, obviously the research requires some funding, yes? In the field which you are working in, it may require a lot of funding, yes? So is it a kind of university support, or you need to apply for some external resources, external projects? How was your research funded?
So for a while, I was funded by both the NIH and the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. And of course I could, for the NIH funding, I had particular projects that I had to work on. At the time, getting structures of G protein coupled receptors was considered certainly not something I would succeed in. And so I couldn't get grants for that. But I had some money for a while, I had some money from Howard Hughes. In 2003, I lost my Hughes funding for reasons I can't really explain, but it was a big issue for me. I lost the main source of funding for the projects that I really wanted to work on, and it was rough. I went into debt. Fortunately, Stanford wasn't watching me very carefully, and so I continued to be able to spend for a while. But eventually, it slowed things down for a bit. I was fortunate to have some friends in industry who supported my research through gifts, gifts that had no unconditional.
So they trusted in your ideas, or you needed to provide some specific objectives, and they followed very strictly if you meet them? How was that?
So they knew what I was trying to do,
Mm-hmm.
and they put no restrictions on the gifts. And in fact, the one gift I remember most, I believe it was $100,000 from an individual from a Danish pharmaceutical company who said, you know, I don't really believe that these structures are going to be of any use, but I still think it's worthwhile supporting this. So, and that really helped, push me over. And I think it also helped the administration at Stanford to at least acknowledge that this was a challenging project, and to continue to support me as well.
In the United States, in fact, the funding system is quite different than we have here, because I know that obviously you may have some public support depending on the university. If it is a state university, if it's private, absolutely, I understand not. But you also rely quite a lot on donations, which is in fact not the case in Poland, and I think in this part of the world. So does the donation come mainly from alumni or other people, other alumni who provide the donation to the university to support the researchers?
So one of the sources of research support that's not governmental comes through endowed professorships. Mm-hmm. And I was fortunate in 2011 to obtain one of these fellowships. They are professorships. They pay for the amount they help pay for the salary, but also provide some research support, which is unconditional, and I can use it for anything.
I remember one of your talks, which can be easily found on the internet, and you were quite against about us assessing the research through impact factors. Can you say something more about that? It was quite a strong speech.
Yes. So I think the use of impact factors has changed or greatly influenced the way we do research, our goals for research. So a student, particularly from, say, China or even Europe, when they come through my lab, they want to work on a project that has the likelihood of making it into a top-tier journal, as opposed to wanting to work on a project because it's the most interesting and perhaps important thing that they could work on. But it might be, it might not be the kind of material that would be considered interesting reading for a very broad spectrum of the scientific community. And I think in many cases, the way young people are hired is first looking at their impact factors, and then sorting them out, and then picking the ones with the highest impact factors. And they're often not the people who have who have been the bravest to take on the most challenging projects or the most innovative. They're often, many young scientists who have very high impact factor research papers are also very good, but I just think it's the wrong metric for selecting young people.
Yes, and in Europe, a discussion just started a few months ago on the new assessment system, but nothing has been developed yet. So different universities joined this coalition. It's called Coalition on Research Assessment System. So we also joined as our university. We believe there will be some developments for this kind of assessment. We don't know where it goes yet at the moment. And I remember when we met at your house, you were very moved about what happens in Ukraine. And yesterday we had the opportunity to meet with the Ukrainian community, students, researchers, and also we had some guests. How did you find it? What did you feel yesterday, Tong Sun, when we met with all the people? I noticed that you were very touched.
Yes, I wish I had spent more time with them.
Mm-hmm.
It seems so superficial. We gathered together, have coffee and cake, and didn't get the chance to really sit and talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the first step.
Yes. I think I will stop for a moment asking questions. I would like to ask the audience to ask questions. Are there any questions? Professor.
I think I can speak up.
You will get a microphone.
So I'm the guy that gave this presentation with the flags at the bottom the other day. Actually I have two questions. So the first one is, so this memorable early December dark day in Sweden is very well scheduled, perhaps, but most of the people in the room actually don't know about it. Perhaps you could say a little bit how it goes from the beginning, from the early morning. And the other question I will have will be related to the lab organization.
I'm sorry, the second?
So, I mean, when you arrived in 2012 in early December to Sweden, the first, this morning when you received later in the afternoon the award, I have heard it's very well scheduled. It's very well organized from the beginning. Could you please tell a few words if you still remember?
Yes, so it's called Nobel Week, and the city really embraces the Nobel Prize. And the first thing that happens is you arrive by plane, and they escort you down a special way to a waiting limousine, and you have you get to meet your driver and your attendant, which already seems very special. You get a special pass through customs, and then you go to the hotel where there are people outside asking you for an autograph. Scientists aren't used to giving autographs. Then I think the next day you get fitted for your tuxedo, which is very important. You have to look very nice when meeting the king. And then there's a series of events, lunches, dinners, and it's it's all very special. It culminates with the Nobel, prior to that is the Nobel lecture. And then a day or two after that is the ceremony and the dinner. And then the final part of the celebration is called an after party. And the students convert classroom buildings into a party hall. There are different themes in different parts of the campus, and you just have you finally have a chance to relax with your friends, and it was very enjoyable. I mean, it's a very special experience.
Thank you very much. And the second question.
Thanks.
Excuse me, Professor. Tong Sun wants to add.
I just want to add to it. The phone call was number one experience. Number two was meeting President Obama. This was a tradition started by President Kennedy. He invited the U.S. laureates to White House so that they can get to know each other, and they will have a familiar face in Sweden, so they're not strangers. So we don't know when the date was because we don't know if Obama was going to win or not. So when we did that, they did the security checks on the day we go, and you go into a room to meet him. And we are great Obama fans. So that was great that he won re-election, and we got to meet him. So that was a good experience.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. And the second question is, so I have moved a few times around, and each time you have to negotiate the conditions. And for instance, when I ask for the lab space, they would say, well, the brains, not the bricks, make the science. But you know, you have to house the brain somewhere. So the typical lab space that I would be able to get was about 1,000 feet, which is roughly about 100 meters. And I would run a group of roughly between 6 and 12 scientists. So how does your lab look like? So how big is it, and how many scientists on average is working in your lab?
So when I moved to Stanford, I was really fortunate to occupy a brand new lab space. Paul Berg, who was a Nobel laureate and recently passed away, had established what's called the Beckman Center for Molecular and Genetic Medicine. And I was lucky to get a brand new lab on the first floor. And I was given 1,000 square feet. So it was roughly 10 bays or 10 benches. I was fortunate to get that in writing. At some point, a couple of years later, there was an attempt to take some of that away. And I had the letter, so they honored it. But it was a great experience because everything was new, and all the equipment was new, and so I was given a lot of support to establish the lab. I have, for the most part, had around 10 people. One time made the mistake of taking too many people. I think I got up to 19. I was miserable, not doing a good job. And so I learned my lesson and have kept it relatively small. I kept my own involvement at the bench for many years. So I would say my last experiments, real bench experiments, were just before the Nobel. And I would help other people, particularly the students or postdocs who were doing the most challenging work or risky work. I would sort of be their super technician and would be involved in producing protein or harvesting crystals or whatever was necessary. I enjoyed that very much, and I actually miss it very much. Unfortunately, that's one of the things that sort of got lost when the Nobel came and we were traveling too much. But yeah, so I think it's, for me, an optimal size is about 10 people.
So.
Thank you so very much. I've got a question about the artificial intelligence. We observe a lot of discussion and rumors about AI being, let's say, good and cons and pros against to use the artificial intelligence in different science areas. And we know that the molecular biology, drug designs was using the bioinformatical tools for kind of pre-processing of the data and some limitation for the molecules. Do you have any opinion to what extent the artificial intelligence can impact your area of your mainly wet lab area in chemistry? Do you think we can benefit mainly, or maybe there are some dangerous things related to AI in chemistry?
So I have to admit that I don't quite understand how, at least in my field, artificial intelligence is going to have a very big impact, with the exception of perhaps in drug discovery. And I'm not sure it will be artificial intelligence. I mean, machine learning, for example. There are, it's a bit hard to explain, but there are now the possibility of developing drugs by in silico screening. So you have a structure of a receptor, and you can use computational methods to look for drugs in virtual chemical libraries, and these libraries are very large. Once someone does one of these screens with a library that's, say, 500 million compounds, you're left with a top scoring, even if it's 0.01%, you still have 10,000 compounds that you actually have to figure out which one is best. And that a lot of that is done by chemical intuition from scientists. So it's actually probing scientists' brains, saying this compound looks good, this doesn't, and narrowing down that 10,000 to maybe 200. Now, if that process through machine learning or artificial intelligence could be automated, I think that would be a great impact, particularly for the structural-based design of new medicines for our receptors or others as well. But for the most part, I don't think it will have a big impact on my field, with the exception that now it's possible to obtain structures through a program we call AlphaFold. So certain inactive GPCR structures, you don't actually have to experimentally determine anymore. Although for the kind of work we do, we still need structures. We still need have to experimentally determine them. So there are some ways that may impact my field, but I think it will definitely impact other fields to a greater extent in the near future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Kobilka and Tong Sun, you visited many R&D centers in the world. Yesterday you visited our European Health Tech Innovation Center of Silesian University of Technology, and at the moment we work on our development strategy. And my question is, what would you suggest what we should do to become more popular in the world? I have to add that our budget is a little bit smaller than Stanford University.
So I'm fortunately not an administrator, and I don't, I'm not really qualified necessarily to address this. I was really impressed with the research that I heard. It's pretty unusual for this kind of visit for me. Normally, I'm telling people about my research, but now I get to sit and listen to really interesting projects that are being done at the university. I think it's important for, obviously, people to do research that can acquire funding, but it's also important to invest in people who have ideas that might be riskier. And I think that's the job of the university, because funding agencies don't normally support that. So if there's some way of finding some funding, private or governmental, where young people can try challenging and sometimes highly innovative research that's likely to fail, I think that's what makes a university special. And I think that's what has made Stanford special.
Maybe I can add my 2 cents. It is unusual to have everything consolidated in one big building where the toys are. I think that does happen at Stanford, like within orthopedics, they can have all those robotics. Within surgery, they can have their own equipment. So we don't find it in one institute where they have all these instrumentation. Does that make sense? So what is happening is also happening in companies, right?
Okay, could you repeat the question?
See, I think what is unusual in your institute is where you have all the equipment in one big building, different labs,
yes,
working on different aspects of healthcare. Yeah. Whereas at Stanford, maybe the genetics department, they develop their own. And in surgery, they do a lot of innovative robotic surgery.
We are generally we are at the beginning of our development. We established our R&D center 2 years ago, and now we're looking for partners. We're looking for institutions who take care, who take under consideration collaboration with us. But we have a huge problem if we talk about investment in young people. We spent about 25 million euros for the center, but we have problem to invest for our young team development. Probably it's a problem in our country, all institutions, public institutions in our country. For example, my colleagues got proposal from USA to come there and continue their career, scientific career, and of course the proposal was much more attractive than we can propose, and we hope that our strategy help us to build much more stronger scientific institutions. But at the moment, I have only 2 people who help me to develop our strategy, to develop our organization generally. Of course, we collaborate with scientists, but the organization at the moment is very small.
Is it possible if 2 or 3 students come together, have an idea, can they write for grants?
Yeah, yes, we invite them, but the problem is financial support. Of course, they can use our tools, our devices, our lab, but the problem is financial support. We don't have possibility to pay for all sometimes innovative and interesting research. That's a problem.
So one thing that's quite different here is you have faculties, and a building is a building for chemistry or for bioengineering, and I don't know to what extent the students and postdocs from chemistry will interact with students and postdocs for bioengineering. At Stanford, there aren't building boundaries, more or less. I mean, for example, our faculty in my department occupies 3 buildings. I mean, there are other, our particular building, Beckman Center, has 4 departments, but people in those departments also may not be housed in the Beckman Center. So there's really a very porous use of space. For example, I mean, the buildings don't define your research, your type of research. And I would just wonder whether the structure here, in particularly where some of the faculties are at quite a distance, might interfere to some extent with collaborations and the benefits of such collaborations.
How do you see the future of research publishing? The point is that it became now a huge business, very profitable. There are large companies like Elsevier or Springer, and they make really good money. but from the viewpoint of a researcher, it is, we are actually we need to publish open access, which is, again, a lot of money. And I really don't like this system. And do you have any idea how can this system be improved in the nearest future?
I agree with you. I wish I had answers for it, but it's incredibly it's incredible how expensive publishing has become, and it's a big chunk of money out of your grants. The other issues, of course, are that have changed over the past decade are multiple first and multiple corresponding authors. What that means for people trying to get jobs was, are you second first or first first? I mean, these are all things that have changed in the field. Also, it's publishing a story often requires a much more complicated, detailed story where, in order to make a high impact paper, you have to include much more data, many more collaborators and investigators, because the goal is to find that high impact publication. And I think all of the incentives built around impact factors and also the cost are changing the way we do research. Probably not in a good way.
Yes, you have a question.
I have a question regarding the hiring process of young collaborators to your research. You worked with many PhD students, you worked with many postdocs, and you probably perused a countless number of CVs or held many interviews. Can you give us any advice about the personal traits you were looking for in the candidates that applied for positions in your group that later translated to a productive and contributing members of your group?
That's a good question. I would say, in general, so first of all, I have mainly postdocs, just maybe one or two graduate students at a time. The graduate students I've had are in the MD PhD program at Stanford, and they're just incredible. They've often come to Stanford after having a real intense research experience, often with Nature papers of their own, and you almost don't worry if these people want to come to your lab. You just say, please, come. They're free of charge, and they're wonderful. Postdocs, I would say that those postdocs who I've hired have written to me, and they clearly have read my papers, and they try to predict where the research is going and where they might want to contribute in not necessarily something we've already done, but in something that we might do in the future. So people who have both experience, it's important that they come with a solid background, but I think equally important that they come with ideas. And it's probably a bit more difficult now for me to make the distinction. If you have a Nobel Prize, people often want to come to your lab, and I want to make sure they want to come to my lab for the science and not for association with a Nobel Prize. And so it's a bit more challenging now than it was in the past. I even remember one of my postdoctoral fellows had a very poor recommendation from his graduate student mentor. And I could tell by reading it, there was some conflict between them, and it wasn't entirely I would say, merited, whereas the other recommendations were good. And he wrote to me. This was prior to our efforts to crystallize the receptor, or when we were failing to do it. He wrote to me saying, I really want to be involved in efforts to get the structure of a G protein coupled receptor, which is, really unlikely for him to succeed at the time, but he wanted to do it. So I hired him on the spot. Yeah. So it really, trying to figure out who is most interested in what you're doing is a challenge.
I will continue this question because you appreciated the students, and on what basis do they come to your lab? Is this a part of their study, or is this a kind of extracurricular activity?
Well, as I said, most of the students have been MD, PhD students. There are occasional medical students. So we, students, for postdoctoral fellows, the criteria is somewhat different. I really look for people who can move projects forward. For students, I think it's our duty to train people who don't have that much experience, so I don't expect that much of them, which is a bit riskier. You might get students who don't succeed. Not very often at Stanford. We now have a program where we're trying to give medical students the opportunities to do research. And we have a special program where medical students can take, so the first 2 years are basic sciences, and medical students can take the second year over 2 years. It's called the split curriculum. And because they're only half time during those 2 years, they can join a lab and they can have a research project. And I hired my first, what we call their physician, it's called the Physician Scientist Training Program. We would like to see more MD only people become scientists as well. So it's my first MD only physician scientist student who had absolutely no bench experience. And it was a bit of a risk taking him into the lab. And he's been fantastic. He's really demonstrated his ability to think through experiments and do complicated experiments. So it's a lot of fun. It's actually more challenging but more rewarding to take a graduate student or a medical student and teach them and train them and see them advance to the point where they can become independent scientists.
Proszę Państwa, ja jestem starej daty. Dominującym językiem był język polski, niemiecki, jak studiowałem, pracowałem. Dlatego ja powiem po polsku, a profesor Marek przetłumaczy swoją angielszczyzną.
Panie profesorze, państwo mają tłumaczenie symultaniczne, także proszę śmiało mówić po polsku.
Po polsku, dobrze. Zanim zadam pytanie naszym gościom, to przypomnę pewną historię sprzed pół wieku, kiedy Politechnika przymusowo mnie wysłała do Nowosybirska. Ciężko było wyjechać na zachód, ale wysłałem, któryś z prominentów zrezygnował i musiałem jechać. Ale najciekawsze zdarzenie to miałem z takim Ślązakiem, który się nazywa Johann Georg Woszni. Znacie takiego? Politechnika w Ilmenau. Jak znałem go z miernictwa z jego podręczników. I tam go spotkałem. Osobno byłem prowadzony, osobno oni byli. Ten Woszni był z takim Weber, takim, to chyba było Stasi, no tego. A ten taka słowiańska dusza, mówi, że on, przewodniczka mówi, że chce porozmawiać ze mną, jak się dowiedział, że jestem z Gliwic. No dobrze. No porozmawialiśmy sobie i na końcu mi powiedział: Bitte begrüßen profesor Zagajewski, Herzlich, rozumiemy. Nasz pierwszy dziekan Zagajewski. On był w Gliwicach i zapamiętał sobie. I tam znowu trochę się wstydziłem, ale po pewnym czasie podszedłem do dziekana i mówię: Panie profesorze, przywiozłem pozdrowienia od profesora Woszni z Nowosybirska. serdeczne. A Zagajewski mówi, a wie pan, że on ma korzenie śląskie? Ja mówię, nie wiedziałem, nic mnie nie mówił. Wotschni, pisze się Wotschni. Mówi, jego pradziad się nazywał Woźny, syn ziemi rybnickiej. Na Saksy pojechał do Saksonii, pracował w hutach szkła. I on zapamięta od tego pradziadka jedno zdanie. Po śląsku. Porządek musi być. Porządek musi być. I teraz moje pytanie do naszych gości. Czy pan profesor Kobilka pamięta, w jakim języku mówił pana pradziadek? I czy jakieś zdania pan... Chodzi mi o korzenie. Skąd są korzenie pana Kobilki?
So that's actually a very interesting question, and it's relevant because I recently visited the Czech Republic. I was contacted about 4 months ago by a Czech physician who is semi-retired. His last name is Kobilka. It's Koblka, as opposed to mine, where it's spelled with an I. And he had done some research, I guess, after the Nobel Prize, noticed our names were similar, and started doing some research and found that my great-great-grandfather was from the Czech Republic in the region of Bohemia. His son John was my great-grandfather, emigrated to the United States in the late 1880s. My grandfather Felix was born in the United States. I never knew my great-grandfather, and really up until recently, I didn't know anything about my connections back to Bohemia and the Czech Republic. But it was a great opportunity. We visited our relatives in Prague. Got to visit my family's farm. So they were farmers back in my great-great-grandfather's day, and yeah, it was really quite special. And I'm ashamed to say that I didn't express more interest in my family history when my grandfather was alive or my father was alive. Fortunately, my aunt is still alive, and I remember when we were on the farm it's just north of Brno, asking her questions on the phone about my family. But yeah, I'm proud to be from this area, and I hope actually to learn more and pass on the knowledge to my children.
Much for this answer. More questions?
Okay. So what would be your advice for mid-career or early career researcher in a country where is actually declining in population or also declining in the interest in master and PhD studies? So what I mean, like research laboratories heavily rely on on students. So in the case where there is, like, let's say 4 to 5 students per researcher, so it's difficult to hire. For example, in India, they have built about 1,000 new universities in the recent 20 years, and they expect to build another 1,000 in the near future. So the field of research is growing there. But in Europe, in Poland specifically, it's just more or less stagnant. So what would you be advised in that case?
But that's a tough one. As I said, I'm not an administrator, and I've been fortunate not to have to be so concerned about those issues. Yeah, unfortunately, I think it's getting more and more difficult, even in the United States, to attract people to basic biological sciences. People are more interested in information technology, but I won't sit here and try to convince you that I know and have an answer. I see it's a big problem, and I'm sorry that you're facing this issue. Unfortunately, money might make a difference. If you have more support, it might be more attractive for young people. But money is always a big problem in science.
Thank you.
If I might, I'm already at the mic.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, apologies. Thank you. I have a different question or different type of field. I'm curious to hear what are your thoughts on the scientists of the future, because even if you're a specialist, right, in terms of competences, they need to be wider, broader. You have to be a little bit of manager, a little bit of finance manager as well to conduct your researchers. And also because all the teams are so multinational these times, I'm curious to hear, how do you find the young scientists, young people, and what are, or how are they different than the old generation of scientists? How can we be more future-proof in terms of technologies, exchange of information, and so on?
So I can only tell you what we do, what I do in terms of my trainees. I try to make sure. So in my laboratory, there are a number of different kinds of techniques people use, and typically one individual will have more expertise in one area than another. But when they first join the lab, I try to make sure that they learn or are exposed to the broadest range of techniques that we have available, and sometimes even techniques that I'm not that familiar with, but I have collaborators who are. So they have the background, even if they have to go deeper into a particular area for their research project, but to be to have a very broad research expertise when they leave the lab. Their papers may be quite focused, but they can go. They're not afraid to try something new because they have experience in biochemistry, pharmacology, molecular biology, in structure determination, and I think that's the key to success for young people.
Hi, here 1 o'clock. I believe you must have heard of the new policy at eLife journal to publish every article that they decide to send out for review, and regardless of the reviewer's comments, together with the reviewer's comments, and that caused quite a storm among editors, and some of them left. So I was wondering if you had any opinion about that.
So I've heard about it. I've never published in eLife, so I know that they have good intentions, and I think they're trying to somehow counteract the issues that we talked about before with high impact journals and issues about who can get their manuscripts in these journals, and also the expense of the publication. So I applaud them for trying something new. I haven't decided yet whether I would want to publish an article there yet.
My question is whether parallel to your intensive research, do you have also some activities within your research group, some social meetings, so some private life within your research group? And if so, is it important or not?
So do we have activities outside of science?
Yeah.
So that's actually a good question. I would say that we had more activities outside of science prior to the Nobel, and somehow fewer afterwards, probably just because of the distraction of travel and so forth. However, our laboratory meetings are rather informal. We have journal clubs. Again, people bring whatever interests them. They may not necessarily be in the field. And we occasionally have get-togethers on birthdays, but we don't have the kind of events that we used to have, where everybody would come to the house, and we might have holiday parties, but not as we don't get together as frequently as we used to. I should say though that the lab is very small, and we're often when I walk through the lab on pretty much a daily basis, we're often just sitting and chatting about things that aren't necessarily science, just in a social way within the lab.
I will have a question in the meantime to Tong Sun. After being so much engaged in the research, and also after receiving the award, I think that the life might also change because it's such kind of involvement requires some kind of sacrifice. Yes, the sacrifice is the time spent with the family. How do you feel this? Do you suffer about it?
Well, the timing was pretty good, because when he got the prize, both kids were finishing college. So I can't say that there was some sacrifice of time on his part, yes. So it didn't really impact the family very much. Am I right?
Yeah, I don't think it really impacted the family, and prior to that, the family generally came first, and I would say I never felt the pressure at Stanford to be there, 18 hours a day. If I had events with my children, I took off and spent time with my children. So that was another plus, excuse me, at being at Stanford. I had no, I wasn't concerned that my family life would have a negative impact on my career.
So my daughter, during the press conference for the Nobel Prize, my daughter was approached by a reporter. So how was it like to miss your father when he's so busy working and all that? And she looked at him. No, it's my mother who was not present, because I was in medical school. He was doing everything. He was a soccer dad. He ran the carpool, driving the kids to school, to soccer practice. He was the soccer assistant coach. So we had good balance.
Other questions? Yes, Professor.
I would like to follow up a little bit on the evaluation of scientists. So we are constantly being evaluated, and we evaluate others. And so about 10 years ago in Sweden, when I was in Sweden, there was an idea that maybe exposure to social media is a good idea. But then we were starting getting offers in spam that for, let's say, $5, you can get 10,000 likes or mentions. So perhaps you could follow on what in your idea may be the future of how we are evaluated, how the journals are ranked and scored.
I think this is one of the most difficult things that I deal with as a mentor. I have no social media presence, so and don't want it. And I wouldn't want to judge a candidate based on social media likes, or I just want to. I have no good answer for this. I found it particularly frustrating. I had a postdoctoral fellow who left the lab a couple of years ago, was probably one of the best scientists I've ever had amazing ideas, excellent hands, could make any experiment work. And he had some good publications, but I found it difficult to find him a really great job, because he was for family reasons, had to go back to Europe, and in one country in particular, and their criteria were for giving him a great position, he didn't quite meet, and a lot of that had to do with impact factors and also how well he sold himself. So I've found it particularly disappointing that I think some of my best people, I may not have been the best mentor in terms of being able to get them the kinds of support and faculty positions that they deserve. But it continues to be, I would say, one of the biggest challenge for me. And I would also say that in the United States, even in the US, the number of positions available for young scientists isn't meeting up with the demand for new positions. So a lot more people are on the job market. And I know from being on a search committee a couple of years ago, reading 150 job applicants, so many really fantastic scientists, it's very difficult to pick the best.
Thank you. I have a question about the teaching activities. Do you have teaching at Stanford currently, and what subjects, if so?
I haven't had a very heavy teaching burden. I taught medical students cardiovascular physiology for many years. I was the head of the cardiovascular physiology block for the students. In the most recent past, I've been heavily involved in curriculum reform and have done less teaching. I would say I couldn't claim to be a very good teacher. I like the subject. I'm not particularly good at conveying it, I fear. So right now I would say I probably teach about 10 hours a year, which I know is almost nothing compared to probably what many of you have to do.
And what is the form of the teaching? Is this a lecture or just?
It's a lecture.
Lecture, okay.
One of the disappointing things at Stanford is that all of the lectures are available online. And most of the students don't come in, they stay at home and watch the lecture at whatever's convenient for them, often increasing the speed to 1.5 or 2 times, so listening to your hour lecture over the course of a half hour. And you're lecturing to a room that maybe has 10 or 15 students. So there's still, out of the 90 students that are admitted, there still are maybe 10% who are interested in coming to lectures. But it's hard. I remember, in the past, I'd be lecturing to 80 or 90 students, and that was sort of motivating. It's a bit hard to get up to lecturing to an empty classroom.
Thank you.
Can I add to that, Brian?
Yes.
You always say, I don't teach well. You're not a natural speaker in a sense where he's articulate. But he is a fantastic teacher, one-on-one, at the bench. If anyone can come ask him about a difficult concept, he has a way to deconstruct it and explain it very well to a lot of people. And he's very patient. Someone else may be very articulate in speaking, but if you ask a question, they stumble, but he doesn't. He always has an answer. So you have to revise your response. You are a good teacher in a different way.
Okay, thank you for having a chance to ask you a question. Professor, I understand that having you here, we are allowed to ask you almost any questions, providing it's not offensive. And because this meeting is less formal in comparison to the morning ceremony, I'd like to call back to one event which happened into my life. That was 2009, and the World Congress of Biomedical Engineering in Munich. On the opening ceremony, there was a lecture by Roger Tsien, also Nobel Prize winner in chemistry from Berkeley. And I remember the funny story which happened, and he described to the audience, 3,000 people, something like that. That was the picture from the granting the prize from the King Carolus Gustavus, who is a big man, and Roger Cien was something like 165 centimeters or something like that. That was the last picture on his lecture, and he made a comment on that. Look, guys, that's me and a king in a penguin suit. How did you feel wearing that penguin suit at that particular moment of time?
So I have to tell you, wearing the penguin suit was quite uncomfortable. As my wife remembers, when we went to get the tuxedo fixed, they buttoned the top button and told me I had to keep it buttoned, and it was very, very tight. And I asked them, could I have a larger size? And he told me no, that his job was to make sure that I looked good. And I didn't have to be comfortable in it. So the other funny thing was, it was actually after the ceremony with the king, but several of us started losing our buttons on the tuxedos. They were separately, they weren't sewn into the shirt, and buttons were popping off, so people were having to make sure their shirt didn't come open. But yeah, I don't remember in great detail the handshake. We had practiced that handshake with a phony king the afternoon before, and just to make sure that you grabbed and held and so forth in the right way. Yeah, I mean, it was a special moment. I just also want to say Roger Chen was really one of my heroes. He's an amazing scientist, and so sad that he died tragically at an age that was too young. He was one of the most brilliant chemists, scientists that I've ever met.
So, dear Professor, your area of research is strictly related to the synaptic transmission. So, I would like to ask you, do you know Thomas Sithoff in person? So, another Nobel Prize winner from Stanford. So,
Thomas Sithoff?
Yes, Thomas Sithoff, German-born neuroscientist.
Yeah, he's a member of our department.
Yes.
So yeah, I know him. Yeah.
Do you know him personally, or not? Any collaboration is provided or something?
So I know him personally. We don't collaborate. But we are together in departmental functions. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Other questions, please. Yes.
So I would like to ask if during your the whole process of your research, do you have the time when you felt that you are doing something that outstanding that it was worth for the Nobel Prize before getting this Nobel Prize?
I guess if I had to say there was one contribution that we made, which was this last structure that I showed, a receptor activating a G protein. It was the end of it was something that I had wanted to do for such a long time that I certainly felt that it was an important accomplishment. I can't really say that I thought, wow, this might get me the Nobel Prize. There were, in my field, it was a big accomplishment. I really had no idea that it would be considered broadly enough to be that impactful. I don't know what else to say. People did ask, I would occasionally get asked, well, now what are you going to do? Because they had known that this was a goal of mine for such a long time that if I achieved the goal, I'd have nothing else to do. and I had to pause and think about it a bit, but it turned out there was a lot more to do after that anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add my 2 cents? So he didn't think that was what he did was Nobel worthy. I, on the other hand, appreciate it more. I think that was adding the T4 lysozyme to stabilize the receptor, because that was very innovative, but also it helped the field. It was a big roadblock. But that, and it was a crazy idea. When he applied for the grant, he said, "Can I run an idea by you?" He explained to me, and I said, "Yeah, why not try?" So he got a small grant for that. So I thought that was Nobel worthy, but of course the field is so big, we never thought it. But until he got the final structure, the complex, then we can see the light a little brighter. But we never thought it was this soon. So that's my personal opinion. Of course, it's very biased.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
I'd like to ask, how do you manage your group? Because you said that it's a group of 10 people, and how do you manage it? Do you oversee everything personally, or are there team leaders? Or how does it work?
How do I manage my research group?
Yes.
It's a good question. So there are always certain senior people in the lab who've been there for a year or two, or maybe more. When someone comes to the lab, they typically don't know exactly what they're going to work on, and so they will spend time with some of the more senior people learning different techniques. And then they will often join one of the senior people. So typically there are 3 or 4 major projects in the lab, and each project will have 2 or 3 people working on it. And new people join as a junior member. They'll help with the project in general, and they'll often see ways that they can kind of split off a part of that or develop a new line of research. So it's there's really no hierarchy. Someone could come to the lab, spend several months learning, and then start their own project and be pretty much independent. But because many of the projects are very risky, I like people to have one high-risk project and one project that's more tractable, or at least where they're working together with other people. But it's important. I definitely discourage people from working completely independently, and each person have their own project and don't collaborate. I don't advocate that approach.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, here it is.
Thank you. So I have a question regarding the future challenges. So what is right now your particular focus on, or in the field, generally, what do you find particularly challenging right now?
So there are 2 basic areas of research in the lab. One is trying to figure out ways of improving the drug discovery process for these receptors. And the other is going deeper into the mechanism of receptor activation of G protein coupled receptors. So in the past 5 years, my lab and many other labs have started producing many structures of receptor G protein complexes. But in spite of the large number, we still don't really understand why a particular receptor will couple to a particular G protein. And that's something that really I feel we should be able to figure out. And it's probably not going to come from either crystallography or cryo-electron microscopy, but other types of biophysical techniques which require more time, effort, and are a bit more challenging to interpret, but have the ability to kind of unlock that mystery. In terms of drug discovery, what I wasn't able to really, what I presented today as a mechanism for signaling for these receptors is a oversimplification. And for example, opiate receptors, which I really am interested in, don't just signal through one G protein. There are 6 different G proteins and 2 other non-G protein pathways. And I believe that some of the beneficial effects of opiate receptor drugs like morphine are mediated by a subset of those signaling proteins. And so the question is, can we activate only a couple of these G proteins that are beneficial and not the ones that are producing the adverse effects like respiratory depression and other. So that's another area that I'm interested in.
Hey, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We gained a lot from your visit, so thank you very much for coming. But I have a question. What is the most memorable to you from this visit, to you both? What do you remember when you come back to Stanford, to Palo Alto?
I think the most memorable is really understanding the complex history of this region and visiting the museum and actually seeing the artwork from coal miners. I can't imagine that coal miners in America, in West Virginia, ever had the opportunity to do something like that. I know that's a hard job, and I'm sure that there were many adversities, but it seemed like the people in this region supported them to a greater extent than we support our coal miners. But also just the political history of this region and how it was part of one country for one period of time, another country, and yet a third country. And it has to obviously affect the culture in this region. So I that was probably the most interesting thing for me.
I agree. I really am very impressed that you all hold the miners in such high standing and the role they play in history. It makes us feel very pampered in California. We never had to go through such adversity, but I appreciate your tenacity. Yeah.
Other questions? I can't. Yes, there is one more.
Just one more, because I can sense that you are very passionate about your field, but also about the research in general. And I'm wondering whether at any point in time you felt burned out, or that at any stopping point, and how did you overcome that, if that happened?
I can't really remember being burnt out. Yeah, for whatever reason, I was irrationally optimistic in that no matter how bad things were, I figured they eventually had to get better.
And did you felt that curiosity is the driver that pushed you forward, or was there any other?
Well, I would have to say that I was also surrounded by irrationally optimistic people. And so we fed on each other. And maybe I chose those people to work with. I remember, for example, a colleague who's a real crystallographer and who taught me crystallography used to look at my crystals, which weren't actually protein crystals, they were some artifact. And he knew, for example, he was for sure that they weren't proper crystals. But nevertheless, he would humor me by helping me collect data or try to collect data on them. And you know, this just kept me going.
Thank you.
You could hear some of our researchers. You could also visit the university campus and also make some discussions. How do you find our university?
Well, I really knew nothing about it before I came here, and I think what I've learned most were from the presentations, which were, I think, very high quality, people doing really interesting things and addressing important questions. I'm afraid it's maybe too short a time for me to say much more about it, but I enjoyed very much my visit here.
Are there any questions? If not, I would like to thank Professor Kobilka, his wife Tong Sun. Thank you very much for visiting our university, for visiting this region. We still have some time to explore it a bit further. But today was a very busy day, so we have another meeting planned for today evening. So I would like you to have a bit of rest. That's why I would like to conclude the meeting. Thank you very much for coming, for participating. And thank you to everybody.